On Mark Randall, I actually heard about Mark Randall through the Agile circuit. And David Bland. You guys know David Bland, a few of you? Yeah, David. So David he's an awesome innovation guy. He's talking about innovation, he thinks about it, he breathes it. And we were talking one day, and I said, it'd be really cool to learn a little bit more about innovation and what other companies are doing. And he said, well, have you heard of Kickbox? I haven't heard of Kickbox. And he said, well, Adobe's got this really great idea on innovation. You should look it up. So I looked it up, and I thought, gosh, this guy, Mark Randall, he really knows what he's talking about. This is fantastic. Imagine if he could share this. So I worked the network, and sure enough, we were able to get Mark Randall to come here to speak. Now, Mark is the chief strategist and VP of innovation over at Adobe. And he spent a lot of his time really cultivating this Kickbox idea, and he's going to talk about that today. And he's going to talk about what makes Kickbox special. He's going to talk a little bit about how Kickbox is, in my opinion, one of the most unique ideas in the industry. So unique that he enabled it to be shared with everyone. And today he's going to talk about how that's shared, and he's going to help maybe inspire us and take us to a whole new level of leadership. And so with that, where's Mark? Is he? Oh, there he is. So I'd like to introduce Mark Randall.
Thank you. All right, is this thing on? Is this thing on yet? All right, can you hear me okay? All right, cool. Hi. A lively crowd for a Friday evening. I think it was the promise of drink coupons that probably got people perked up here. Yeah, I came in and I saw the AlienCon people. I was like, this Agile conference is awesome. I mean, I heard Agile people were weird, but I had no idea how creative they could be. So it's great to be here. I'm going to share with you a little bit about the journey that we've been on at Adobe around innovation and what we've been doing. So going back to 2012, we realized that we needed to make some changes in our traditional creative business at Adobe. And these were actually, taking a long-term business, been around 30 years, and taking it, and probably the biggest change ever in the history of our company. Complete change in technology platform, business model, and really how we think about developing tools. And so we had to undertake a lot of changes. One of those was aggressive implementation of Agile across Adobe development processes. But we also wanted to change how we think about doing innovation inside the company, because we realized we needed to make that change. So we'd spent decades putting round, shiny things into cardboard boxes and shipping them around the world. And we had to change that in a period of 18 months to 2 years. We had to undergo this transition to being an online, always available subscription-based service delivering these tools to creatives all around the planet. And this transition has been very successful for us. You may have sort of read about it. Our stock has skyrocketed. The number of users has skyrocketed of our tools. It's completely transformed our business and has really become a Cinderella story to Wall Street, which is awesome. And while I'm here, I'd like to take full credit for every bit of that. The other 15,000 people helped me. Our CEO was definitely instrumental in helping me accomplish that. No. Obviously, a lot of people did a lot of great work in making this happen. But what fell to me was this request from my boss to figure out how we should change innovation inside Adobe. And the reason I got this request was my background is as a startup entrepreneur. Been involved in 3 startups, sold my third one to Adobe, which is how I ended up at Adobe. So in my 40s, I finally, according to my mother, had a real job, the first real job in my life, because I finally worked for someone instead of in my company that I founded. So none of the other success mattered, right? Like no matter how big my startups got, how many hundreds of people were employed, or how big the products became, till you work for someone else, it's not a real job. So in my 40s, gainfully employed for the first time, my mother was delighted that I had not turned out to be a failure. And, but also now figuring out how to work for somebody else inside a large organization. And I have to say that the first couple of years, I was pretty much an abject failure inside Adobe. Fortunately, they were patient, but I'd spent years consecutively designing and shipping some really pretty successful software products in the creative space, in my kind of boutique startup software world. And then I go to Adobe and completely strike out, for like 2 straight years. There's hadn't been a period of 2 straight years I haven't shipped a product to customers since I was like 19. So it was like, whoa, what's wrong? And I realized that big companies are different than little companies. Nobody gave me that memo when I got hired. And there are really great things about big companies, particularly Adobe. I could complain endlessly over beer about things inside of big companies, but there are some really awesome things about big companies, and especially Adobe. There's tremendous resources. There's a lot of really smart people. The problem is that there are endless battles around prioritization of those resources and allocation of those smart people, and honest debates between smart people about how to apply those resources, where we should put them. And this is one of the big challenges, I think, that stops large organizations. So after failing for a couple of years to do new things, I decided to change tactics. And I realized I actually have to change what worked for me really well in my own startups, where I was the CEO, to do things differently inside a large organization that just had a huge amount of processes. And so what I learned was, first of all, to stop working well with others. I thought I had to work better with other people, and turns out one of the secrets is to not tell anyone what you're doing in the early phases, to not be a coalition builder, but actually to go out and actually test your ideas without telling anybody inside the company, test them with people outside the company first. So I actually started doing this. I started actually prototyping things myself with people outside the company, and then testing it directly with customers before I told anybody that worked inside the company the idea. And then I would come back and test, actually show the results of my small tests, and say, well, here's what customers said. And it turns out this was profoundly successful, because most people would come in and pitch ideas showing some analyst CAGR charts and projections of future growth in an Excel spreadsheet, with no customer reality behind it. And then you're asking an executive at the head of the table to decide, is this a good idea or not? And that's pretty much impossible. They just have to guess. And so people noticed that I started doing things with really small groups of people, mostly stolen from other managers, and doing them very quickly without telling anybody what I was doing until I had actual results, and then going and sharing those results, very carefully opening the kimono and kind of showing what we were doing, and then iterating really fast. And this sort of started to get attention. And so the request came from my boss when we realized we want to change how we do innovation. The request was basically, could you teach other people how to do what you've been doing? Because it started working. So I started actually being able to initiate big things and new products, and our first online service actually came out of one of these crazy ideas that I didn't tell anybody about, that the company didn't ask for, that my boss didn't know I was doing, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I started getting really skilled at actively hiding ideas from the CEO, and moving them each quarter into a different group so they couldn't be discovered, and that sort of thing. And it became a lot more fun, because it was absolutely sort of surreptitious and divergent. And that was okay, because ultimately customers ended up being really happy with what we were doing. So I want to tell you a little bit about the story and what ended up happening when my boss said, well, can you teach other people how to do this? Because initially my answer was, no, I'm not a teacher, and I don't even know exactly what it is we're doing. I guess I could think about it, but if you have somebody that wants to know, just have them ask me, I'll tell them what I did. And how I think about it. And he said, well, actually, I was hoping to deploy it more widely to the whole company so that people could be exposed to this sort of way of doing things, because what you're doing is weird, but it's working and I like it, so let's try to spread it. I basically said, nah, I don't know how to do that. So I went away, and he gave me some, warm encouragement to, just keep thinking about it. If you come up with anything, back burner, just let me know. So I did keep thinking about it and talking to some other people I work with about it. Got this weird request, don't know how to do this. And somebody made a really great observation. Because they said, well, you don't know how to teach other people and deploy a corporate process in a large organization. You're not an innovation leader. You don't even want to be a manager. You just want to make cool stuff and ship it, which is really my goal in life. And but the one thing you do know how to do is you know how to make a product to satisfy a customer problem. Because I've been doing that my whole life. So this smart person said, why don't you think about fulfilling your boss's request, think about it as a product. Think about your customer as innovators inside a large organization that have a problem. They're trying to do something and they're failing, and develop a product that helps them succeed and solves that problem for the customer. And that's where Kickbox came from. Because I was like, oh, you're right, I do know how to make a product. Okay, so let me make a product and sell it to the employees inside the company. Say, you have a problem, this will help you solve it. So I went out immediately, started surveying my customers, starting to find out why they weren't innovating, what was stopping them, what their challenges were, how they thought about it, what they really wanted to accomplish, what path they wanted to take. And very rapidly, Kickbox kind of came together. So we created a rapid prototype and deployed it inside the company to 60 employees, first group. I did this without telling my boss or any other manager or executive in the company. Which was a little bit radical as well, but kind of in keeping with the Kickbox process. Kickbox was kind of created using the Kickbox process, which was to make this really fast prototype, get it into the hands of customers. Management opinion doesn't really matter yet until a customer has an opinion. And then I'm going to go back to management and share the customer opinion before I listen to management opinion. Because management opinion without a customer opinion is what? Bullshit, right? Okay? So, management can sometimes be right. They're a proxy, hopefully with lots of experience, decades of experience. But every time I hear a leader talking about, I have decades of experience, I'm like, that's awesome. Too bad we're not serving customers of decades ago. Because I'll bet back then, your ideas were awesome. But right now, your experience of what customers' pain points are today, you're not spending enough time with them usually. And this is the nature of being a leader inside a large organization. You don't get to spend enough time with your customers, which is probably one of the greatest pains of my life is I don't get enough time with customers. So what's inside this magic box that causes this change? Well, that's what I'm gonna go and talk to you about. So Kickbox, in the intervening time, became very successful at Adobe. And then I started to get a few phone calls from other people in other companies in the Valley. And it turns out some people who've been consulting at Adobe and doing other things had gone to other companies and had heard in the lunchroom about people talking about this crazy Kickbox shit that Adobe's doing. And talked to other companies about it, and I got some calls, people saying, would you tell us what this Kickbox thing is? I'm like, sure. Just tell them what we're doing. It's our sort of homegrown process. Looks like it's working well for us. And then started to get more and more calls. Got asked to go talk at a conference about it, and then it kind of blew up. And I was pretty soon getting like 3-4 dozen calls a week from other companies asking about this. So as a self-defense maneuver, I said, I can either keep making new products or I can keep talking about Kickbox. So why don't we just open source it so everybody will just have it? We don't view it as a trade secret. We just developed it based on what we do, partially based on what I think, partially encapsulating a bunch of Adobe's knowledge over many decades and putting those together, peanut butter and chocolate, and coming up with this weird process. So we open sourced it about a year and a half ago, and it got a lot of attention. And today, there are thousands of companies now that have deployed Kickbox. It's completely free. Anybody can go download it. And you have everything that we deploy and how we actually do Kickbox has been shared. So you can go to this site anytime you want and just sign in, or go here and sign up, and it'll email you all the files. And so you get everything to make your own box. In fact, the files that we give to Kinko's, who manufactures all of our boxes, that whole package is exactly what you get to download with some other instructions and other things. So it's literally everything we have, the full contents. Plus, there's now other versions, so other companies. So there's localized into Korean, Italian, French, German. Because it is open source, we ask people to share back. And so people have done lots of cool things. Cisco has deployed this worldwide to all 60,000 employees. Caterpillar has deployed it. Liberty Global, which is kind of like the Comcast sort of cable company of Europe, which is owned by Virgin Media. They're the largest cable company outside North America, has deployed it. So a bunch of United Nations, Peace Corps, other people, nonprofits, universities as well, deploying this, which is really cool to see people taking it, adapting it, and putting it into their own culture. I don't think you should copy exactly what we do at Adobe. I think you should use it as a framework and a base for what you do in your own culture. So let me walk you through what this thing is. So one of the first goals was to increase our rate of failure because we weren't failing enough. So in an average year, now by the way, I'm not saying failing is a good thing. I'm saying failing is a necessary evil. Some people just come out and say, we need more failure. Failure is good. No, failure sucks. I hate failure. It feels bad. It drives my insecurities. It makes me lose sleep. But failure is a necessary evil. You have to go through it in order to achieve what you want. If what you're looking for is divergent innovation. If you're looking for the next obvious thing, you don't have to fail a lot. But if you're looking for something that's really, out there, and that's what we were trying to do with Kickbox, the goal here was to increase that rate of failure. So how do we do that? Let me tell you what the numbers were sort of. In an average year at Adobe, before Kickbox, we would test a dozen to 24 ideas. And 20 to 30% of them would end up becoming shipping products or new features inside a product. And that was sort of our hit rate, right? So we had 60, 70% failure. But if you look at that and you compare it to the startup world, where 1 in 1,000 crazy startup ideas ends up becoming a new big deal, our ratio was way, way out of whack. So we're essentially we're at a casino, but we're only placing even money bets, right? We're only placing things that are highly likely to come up, roses for us, which means what? We're not trying really bold things. And a lot of times, particularly in a large organization, where the competition comes, the sea changes that cause you to become irrelevant, because one of the things that you need to realize, particularly in a large organization, is the chances of you getting beat in a straight-up drag race with somebody else, extremely low. The chances of how you'll actually be beat is the playing field will shift under your feet, you won't realize it, and you'll simply become irrelevant. You'll be still winning the race you were winning, but that race will no longer be relevant to the grand prize, which will emerge somewhere else. And those changes tend to emerge in the seams, in the cracks between your organizational boundaries, between the language that you've used to define your customer segments, to define the markets that you sell to. It'll emerge in the cracks between those things, so nobody will see it coming. Nobody will notice the sea change happening in the early days because it's in those seams between your business units. Because you tend to organize around how you see the world. So you interpret the world, and that may be a correct interpretation, but when the world is changing faster and faster rate, you're not changing your organizational structure fast enough. So that's why you need divergent innovation. So with Kickbox, first year, we went from trying a dozen to 24 ideas to testing over 1,000 new ideas. And we did it at the same fixed cost. Because before we were spending $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 to test out a new idea, prototype it, market researchers, user researchers, developers, designers, building up a prototype or a mock-up, going out and testing it with users, sometimes ethnographers and other really expensive, super smart people getting in the loop and making things happen, which is the right thing to do, but much later in the process. So early on, we weren't trying enough divergent ideas. So people that have studied Kickbox, one of my favorite quotes about it in one of the case studies is that Kickbox is the innovation process that gives you innovations you don't know how to ask for. So at Adobe, it's not the only innovation process we use. Traditionally, we have done innovation in the top-down way. Business units, product teams, the Photoshop team is going to come up and they're going to do innovation. They're going to create new features. They're going to create new technologies. They're going to do line extensions like Lightroom that goes with Photoshop that is an adjacency for them. So they're going to continue to do that innovation. We also have our labs that do university collaborations. We have a few entrepreneurs and residents that are trying crazy new ideas out on their own. What Kickbox is, so we've always done those things, and we continue to do those things. They've always worked for us, and they're continuing to work as well as they always have. Kickbox is an additional layer we added on the top. So I don't want you to walk away thinking this is the only innovation Adobe does. It's the new layer we added. It was a missing wavelength that was invisible to us. And this wavelength is grassroots innovation, tapping the people in our organization and empowering them. Now, you remember the archetype of the white suggestion box, right? You put a suggestion, and then nothing ever happens, and then people stop putting suggestions in the box. Unfortunately, that's too much of the way that things were inside our organization. We weren't really causing things to happen for employee ideas. And so employees stopped generating those ideas. And it's interesting, I get questions all the time now from CEOs of large organizations that are excited about Kickbox and hear about it. And one of the first questions they always ask is, where do I find really innovative people to hire in my organization? Okay, yeah. So the problem is definitely your people, right? I always ask, well, are most of the people in your organization human? Mostly, except the ones at AlienCon. Most of the other ones, yeah. Mostly human. Good, then they're already innovative. And the nature of your organizational construct is to stop innovation. Because the more you create optimization and efficiency around a large organization, the more you start stopping divergent innovation ideas from being able to happen. Because what are they? They're noise that the system needs to squelch, so it can be optimally efficient at executing the existing plan of record. So it's not like you can do one or the other. In fact, a lot of people I talk to, theorists about innovation, say, well, we're going to change our organizational structure to support innovation. I think that's a mistake. Because when I looked at Adobe, after being there a little while, I realized organizational structure works pretty well. We ship some of the world's largest software, day and date, on the day we predicted, years in advance, localized in like 30 languages, including Klingon. And if they miss by 2 weeks, they're like in sackcloth and ashes, right? Which I found amazing when I joined the company. I'm like, I'm from a startup. If we make the right year, we're like thrilled. That's a woohoo! We're in the right calendar year. And so, there's an awesome machine that does that. And if I want to change that machine, I risk breaking the awesome. In fact, my first few months at Adobe was just studying the machine. Like, I wanted to look behind the curtain to see how that magic trick works. How do you ship software that complex? Mostly bug-free, mostly working to mostly happy customers, over and over again, day and date. How do you do that? And they built this amazing machine to do it. Secret of the amazing machine is, as soon as you ask it to change 1% to do something different, whole thing breaks. So you can have that machine, or you can have innovation. But when you say, I'm going to change the machine to also be innovative, but still do that, which Wall Street is counting on us to do every quarter, then you have a problem. You got to make a choice. So what Kickbox is not a change that you're going to put into your system. It is a hack on the system. It changes nothing about the system. In fact, Kickbox can be implemented inside an organization that knows nothing about Kickbox. In fact, I've had people that were Adobe employees, trained and successful in Kickbox, who then left Adobe, went to work at another large organization, never told anybody anything about Kickbox, and executed Kickbox and successfully shipped a new product in an organization where it wasn't their job to do that against active management actively resisting them shipping that new product. And it worked. Because the premise of Kickbox is, we're going to help you ship the product against a company actively trying to stop you. Now, at Adobe, the company's not actively trying to stop you, but it's kind of passively not going to help you. And I find mentally it's better to just assume that they're all trying to stop you. Just makes it easier. So, we increase our rate of failure. Next, we deploy the box to any employee in the organization that wants it. So this is kind of radical. A lot of people say, well, why don't you just focus on your engineers, your developers, your product managers? Why would you let your HR people, your press release writers, your janitorial staff innovate new products? Why not? Because what we're doing is we're making thousands of incredibly small bets. So I would expend more resources trying to filter people in or out of the process than it costs for me just to let them do their idea. In fact, Kickbox, to do the early phase of an idea, I can actually demonstrate budgetarily on a spreadsheet that we were spending more money to have a mid-level manager listen to somebody's crazy idea and decide not to do it than it cost to actually just say yes and do the idea. So the second point of Kickbox is we pre-approve every idea without ever hearing it. If you're an Adobe employee, the idea you haven't even had yet is funded. It's so funded, you're not allowed to tell anybody what it is. Don't tell your manager, don't tell me what it is. So I don't know what the Kickbox ideas are. I don't run Kickbox. Kickbox runs itself. I just try to keep out of its way. But the innovators run Kickbox. So I'm not choosing winners. Leaders aren't choosing winners. Customers pick winners, because ultimately that's what really happens anyway. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, you could say that to employees and they'll say, oh, sure. You love my idea until you hate it. No, we're going to fund your idea. So it's really funded. So in every red box that every employee can get just for asking is a prepaid credit card to fund their idea. It's initially loaded with a first tranche of $1,000. So whenever I say that, half of the people in the room will say, $1,000, how can you possibly give any employee in your organization, any employee that asks gets $1,000? Sight unseen, no filter, no nothing? That's craziness. How many people are there in that group? Just help me out, anybody? Where are my finance? There's nobody in finance here? There's no fiscally responsible, there you are, thank you. There's no fiscally responsible people here. All right, then all my developers say $1,000, that's not enough money to build anything. How many people are in that group? Me here? Yeah? Okay. The rest of you, what group are you in? And both points of view are right. It's not enough money to build anything, and you can't possibly just be granting $1,000 to everybody. Here's the thing, is that if you make it available to everyone, fascinating thing we learned, because I've ended up talking to hundreds and hundreds of people who run innovation in all kinds of different interesting organizations. And one of their first assumptions is, how do you stop everybody from getting a box? And I said, what do you mean stop? I expend enormous amounts of time putting signs in our elevators and on every stairwell and every escalator, free red box, just ask. And I just have crossed over 10% of our employee population in 4 years taking the box. 1,600 people have gotten boxes at Adobe. I wanted way more by now. So, and that's me begging. And I still daily hear from people inside Adobe, you know, I just read in Forbes magazine about this thing called Kickbox that apparently was invented at Adobe. Do we do that? I'm like, have you read the employee newsletter or been to any company all hands in the last 4 years? People are busy in a large organization, right? So you think you're communicating, but I begged on my knees to get people to do this. So if you're assuming that everybody's going to run and grab the box, you're wrong. It's not happened in any organization that's tried to do this. Why? Because innovation is hard. And basically the job of being an innovator sucks. It's really hard. It's kind of thankless, super challenging, and people in their right mind shouldn't want to do it. So by definition, it's basically people not in their right mind. And apparently that's about 10% of the Adobe employee population at this point. Because you can't be assigned to come to Kickbox. At Adobe, no manager can tell you to come. So I've had lots of managers. I want my whole team to come to this. It was great. Then ask them politely to sign up. But they have to individually sign up. You can't make it part of their job. Why? Because I don't think you can pay people to innovate. You can pay them and they'll pretend to innovate because you're paying them. But it's like paying people to fall in love. You know, they'll pretend, but you can't make them fall in love. So innovation is like a force of nature. It's something that is inside human beings. They're all born with it, and then corporations squish it out of them. But they all have it. And magic happens in grassroots innovation when we align a hard customer problem with our organizational goal with an employee who's passionate and sees that opportunity. And I can't make that nexus happen. We can't order it into existence from the CEO's suite. But when it does happen, it's magic, and we want to get out of its way. So what we're doing is we're equipping people with the tools. So most of the people that come to Kickbox, that magic probably isn't happening right now. It's like a fire drill. When's the best time to do a fire? Before there's a fire, right? It's the best time to do a fire drill. So we're giving them a project. They're going to come up with a crazy idea, which is why we don't care what the idea is, because we're assuming the first one is never going to work. But we're only spending $1,000. We spend more than $1,000 spending people to a day of professional development. So far, Kickbox has achieved more in terms of professional development, employee retention, and employee engagement than any program in the history of the company. HR has said, if we got 0 innovation out of Kickbox, they would fund the whole thing, because it's actually really cheap. So first of all, think about it as developing your people, because innovation is like riding a bike. You're not naturally good at it. So you're going to fall the first time and skin your knee. So you have to make it okay for you to fail the first time. And as we predicted, many of our most successful Kickbox innovations are on their second or third Kickbox, because it's something you have to get better at. So we're going to do a hackathon, and there's going to be some brilliant innovation that happens in that one hackathon? No, why would that be the case? Well, our Olympic medal in cycling is going to be won by people that have never seen a bicycle till last week. No, they're going to skin lots of knees on the way to getting to that Olympic level competition. And we have to create an environment where it's A, okay, career-wise for them to do that, B, expected for them to fail, so they feel good about it internally. It's okay, nobody feels good about failing. And they learn something, and then they can repeat. And when they actually have that intersection, that nexus where they see that opportunity, now they know what to do. The other thing we've seen is that it's a contact high, it spreads. So we've had innovators create new products that never went to Kickbox, but work with someone that did, who came back and shared what happened. And now we're trying to build empathy for what innovators are trying to do in our organization, which is why we're trying to push Kickbox into the employee base. So prepaid credit card with $1,000. What else is in the box? Sugar and caffeine, 2 of the 4 major food groups of all innovators. Why? Because we're serious about you doing this, and it's hard, and chemically modifying your brain helps. There's also instructions. Start here. So when they open up the box, it's broken down into 6 color-coded levels, and here they are. These are the 6 levels, and I'll briefly explain them to you. But this is self-managed, so there's no big infrastructure running Kickbox. All of Kickbox is about 20-30% of my time, half of my admin's time, and that's it. So I've talked to other organizations that have 200-300 innovation coaches full-time trying to support innovators. So they're like, how many innovation coaches do you have? 0. Innovators don't need coaches. They need people to get out of their way. I don't think you can coach people to innovative success. I think it's something that happens like falling in love. I think we can erect lightning rods, but I can't make storms happen. So when people say, how do I get this innovation? I'm like, well, we can prepare with lightning rods, but I can't make storms. Neither can you. But the good thing is humans are full of storms. If we get out of their way, that serendipity will happen. And the thing is to bottle it, catch it and bottle it when it happens naturally. And we're suppressing the natural thing that happens. So we don't have to change this attitude of having to make it happen to, no, it wants to happen. You're stopping it. Stop crushing it. Let go a little bit. So part of the key here is putting trust into action. Because the other thing is that $1,000, no receipts, no tracking, no expense reporting. It's not a gift. So far, we haven't discovered anyone that squandered the money. The great fear was, they'll run to Vegas and supposedly be bad at blackjack, and lose all the money, spend it on booze and blackjack, and it'll be on the front cover of the Wall Street Journal that we funded this. Okay, hasn't happened. Why? Because when we give the people money, we say, you don't have to, our great friendly expense reporting system, you don't have to use it. Why? Because you're the CEO of your idea for the first $1,000. You choose how to spend the money. And what our finance people have said is, if every $1,000 at Adobe was spent as efficiently as those $1,000, our OpEx would be 1% of what it is today to run the whole company. So it's the same thing that happened in Soviet Russia when they had these big factory farms that were low efficiency, and then they gave each farmer just one little plot of land of their own that was personal, that they could keep whatever, and that became 600% more efficient than the factory. It's exactly what happens with the $1,000. So far from squandering it, people are insanely creative with how far they make it go. Why? Because it's theirs. Why don't we do the tracking, which is controversial? Because we wanted to prove to people that we're putting trust into action. Company has to take the first step. A lot of people say, well, how did you get the company to this? So forward thinking of Adobe. I agree it was. Or it would have been had I told Adobe that that's what I was doing. but I didn't. But the awesome thing about Adobe is they didn't stop me when they found out. But if I had gone in up front and said, I don't want to track any of this, it would have been a much more difficult conversation. When it was already working, to say this is why it works, much, much easier. So what happens here when you get, by the way, this is the 6 levels. Each level has a set of actions that you complete at the end that you do yourself, checkboxes, like a checklist. And when you completed the checklist at the end of level 4, you can advance to level 5. When you complete the checklist at the end of level 5, you go to level 6. What happens if you beat level 6? Because, by the way, these levels are not your friend. They are obstacles to be overcome. So what happens if you beat the red box? If you stand victorious atop a crushed red box, you get a fabulous prize. A blue box. What's in the blue box? No one knows. But I can tell you that it's delivered by leprechauns who come in riding on unicorns. And it fulfills all of your wildest product fantasies. No, what happens? So every red box is identical. Every blue box is different. Why? Because every innovator is different. Every idea is different. Every customer is different. But for the red box phase, we cast them to the wind. No filtering. Anyone that wants one can get one. Your idea is a flying robot toy? Fine, sounds good for $1,000. We're never going to ship a flying robot toy? Sure, maybe. But you're going to learn a lot. And if you're really passionate about that idea, you're going to learn even more. So I'm going to let you do whatever you want. But we explain to people through the process, if you want the company to fund you beyond the first $1,000, your idea is going to have to show some positive customer data. And we walk them through that process. So your flying robot toy may be challenging because it doesn't have a good fit with our brand. So they become essentially their own hackathon judge. So it turns out I've judged a lot of hackathons and business plan competitions inside and outside Adobe. And the algorithm that you run as a judge in one of those things is not hard. I could teach any one of you to do it in half an hour. In fact, I do teach every Adobe employee how to do it. I don't need to judge your ideas. I could teach you how to judge your ideas in half an hour and save us all a lot of time. It's not hard. So that's what we do, and it's in the box. So it's open to all employees. They can do any idea they want, any crazy idea. Turns out there's very few super crazy ideas, actually disappointingly few in my view. Most of them are really interesting, somewhat divergent, but in our main core lines of business. Why? Because in order to advance beyond the initial $1,000, to do that advance, they need to not pass a judging panel. I hate judging ideas because, first of all, trying to judge new ideas is like trying to judge your Olympic track and field team looking at the nursery, at the little babies that have just been born, the new babies, and saying, oh, in 18 years, that's a good long jumper. I think that's a good, it's like trying to judge these early ideas when they're at the napkin phase is silly, just silly. Because real startups evolve and change on their way. Why don't we do that in business? Give them some room and space to evolve and change. So how you get an idea from the red box to the blue box, and by the way, most blue box ideas happen and become a blue box without me ever knowing what they are or hearing about them or ever even talking directly to the innovator, is you have to get any leader inside Adobe, senior director level or above, of which there are hundreds, any one of them, to fund your next round of experiments from their budget. So beyond the initial $1,000, there is zero budget for Kickbox. We fund no innovation beyond the first $1,000. Why? I teach our innovators how to steal the money from other people's budgets. Because that's what I did. All of the products that I ever shipped at Adobe, I stole the money and the people. So the entire time before I did Kickbox at Adobe, I had zero headcount and zero budget, and I shipped 3 products. All with stolen resources. Yes, my peers would start grabbing their wallet when I'd come around, right? But the stuff was so good, it looked better than the stuff they were already funding. So they would pull it over. Why did it look better? Because it had data, and it was good. So if your idea can't steal the resources from other ideas, then it shouldn't be funded. It should be shut down. So this whole idea of creating a special short bus for innovation projects where they don't have to be as good as everyone else, they don't have to be as good as the mainline funded projects, is stupid. They have to be better. So you have all these little baby chicks in the business units, all these teams doing their little beloved thing, and I'm unleashing these little baby velociraptors on the nests. Go kill them, take their money. Kick them out of the nest and take their spot. And that's what happens. And it actually works. So that's how you get funded. But the interesting thing is, some of our innovators that have been funded with projects, it was on their 11th pitch. So this isn't like some sorority blackball party. One blackball and you're out. No. You got hundreds of senior directors you could go pitch. Just like venture capitalists. You could pitch an infinite number of venture capitalists. And a lot of people say, oh, we had to pitch 15 venture capitalists before we got it to a yes. Now, is that because startups should have just gone to the 15th one first? No, the idea changed on the way, and it got better. And hopefully, some of those venture capitalists in between gave them good feedback that caused them to polish their idea and get better data to support their contention. And that's exactly what happens with Kickbox. So, I'm going to just walk you quickly through these levels. I want to leave a minute for some questions. So, one is all about motivation. Employees have to have their own motivation, which is why we can't assign people to come to it. I can't make you fall in love. You are going to fall in love with an idea, and I want you to be equipped when you do. Oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. Two, we're going to teach you how to ideate, because having ideas is a part of being an innovator. So it's not just for ideas that already exist. We want to teach our people how to be having new ideas and observing the world around them, and customers and their challenges, and putting those into practice and capturing all of their bad ideas. So there's a bad ideas book right in Kickbox. There is no good ideas book because all new ideas look like bad ideas, except for just those few that look like awesome ideas, and those are definitely bad ideas. So you just label them all bad ideas and write them down and capture them first. Level 3 is a bunch of tools for polishing, like scorecards and other things. Use the business model canvas and other checklists. Very simple tools that anybody can learn to evaluate different lenses through which they can look at their idea. And level 4 is very much taken from my friend Steve Blank and Eric Rees, lean startup methodology. Go out and test very rapidly with customers. Do qualitative testing initially, then quantitative testing, like with a website. Here's a team out of our Romania office. Their idea was, hey, your photos could look great, but you may not know how to use Photoshop, but you want photo improvement done. So could we get people that have Photoshop and know how to use it to help people that have photos that want to be improved on an a la carte basis? So in an hour, they put up a website on Squarespace, and not under the Adobe brand, so branding didn't have to approve it because it wasn't Adobe. Turns out Adobe branding can only approve things that happen with the Adobe name. You make up a new brand, doesn't matter. So, because branding said, you can't do that. I'm like, why? This isn't the Adobe brand. You're responsible for the Adobe brand. This isn't. So we had real customers upload real requests the first day. Then they went and did the work by hand themselves. Send it back to customers, send them a net promoter score, and 48 hours later, they have real data. So 4,000 unique visitors, 9% upload photos. Then they changed the proposition to, would people pay $1.99? They didn't put a shopping cart in, they just changed one button, which was pay $1.99, click here to pay. Then when they clicked through the next page, the text said, congratulations, you get it for free. So there's no code change. It was just, once again, same Squarespace template, changed the wording. But they registered intent to pay. How do I know? Because the ratio went down from 9% to 2.7. Still a really good conversion ratio. People now registering an intent to pay and delighted to find out they don't have to pay after they put down their intent to pay. Then they went out and said, would people actually do this work? So they put up another website, similar template on Squarespace, 600 unique visitors, 22% signed up, and 25% of those completed the task. So the team sent their own family photos with requests similar to what they'd gotten from customers. So two-sided, they played the man in the middle. So no other customer saw a customer's work, so there was no privacy law violation or anything. But they sent their own photos, and then they using their Kickbox credit card, they paid them for doing the work. And so they figured out that this marketplace could actually work and did the validation in about 3 days. And this pitch rocked way over some napkin idea because they have real data. So why would I want to see a pitch without some real data if we can go out and do this kind of test very rapidly? Level 5 is all about evolving the hypothesis, which they did by putting in the price. Then level 6 is all about, let's stop playing this game called Hippo. You guys heard of this game? Most large companies play it. It's called highest paid person's opinion. Right? So we want to put the data on the table and let the data speak. So I can think that this idea is dumb, and there have been some Kickbox ideas that had I had the ability to shut them down, I would have, that have turned out to be very successful. So thank goodness I didn't put myself in charge of looking at or approving these ideas, because I, as smart as I am, could be wrong. So let's get some real data and look at that data. Now I can question your data, and then we can decide if this is something we want to invest in. So how's it gone? This is what the funnel looks like through the 6 levels. And today we have 25 blue boxes, a couple of shipping products, and some more in the funnel on the way for very low cost in a program that HR would fund just based on the employee engagement, retention, and training that we're doing in terms of being data-driven. So now all of the teams inside the company are data-driven. Last story I'll share with you is one day my boss stopped me in the hallway and said, I got a big complaint from the Photoshop team, one of the product managers on Photoshop, about Kickbox. And I said, oh, really? He said, yeah, apparently a couple of team members, engineers, had been to Kickbox, and then now months later they had gotten a spec from marketing that the product manager had negotiated with marketing what the spec was going to be, and that they had given the spec to the engineering team to implement, and the engineering team didn't agree. They thought customers wouldn't like this, so without telling their manager and using their coffee fund, they went out and used Kickbox methodology to test these new features for Photoshop in 2 days. Directly with customers, went back to their boss and said, no one wants it. Now the boss had to go back to marketing and say the engineers don't want to implement it, and they have this data that says that customers don't want it, so how do you respond to the data? And my boss said, so they're psycho. And I said, is this a problem? And he said, it's perfect, don't change a thing. It's exactly what we want, which is employees owning, building the right product for a customer they feel they own. So that's Kickbox. We combine passion of employees with our organizational purpose to solve hard problems for customers by empowering people and trusting them in the organization to do the right thing. And you can go do it today. Download it at the site. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Do we have maybe a minute for questions? We're going to keep it really tight. So keep your questions to one question, really tight. Dave.
Yeah. Any issues? Oh, sorry about that. Any issues with intellectual property concerns?
Sure. Lots of people bring up the concern, but what's interesting is that in reality, there isn't much of an IP concern, because what we're testing with customers is a value proposition, and really what you can patent is a way of implementing something, not a value proposition. So ostensibly, if we're testing ads or brochures, and if you have an ad or a brochure that discloses enough to make your idea unpatentable, it's a shitty ad or brochure. So if I tell you I have an anti-gravity machine, and it will levitate you, it can transport you instantly around the world, I haven't disclosed anything about how it works. I haven't made this unpatentable in any way at all. And so I can bring the value proposition of something without having to disclose anything about the IP. And so we have a set of legal guidelines that goes in the box. It's one side of one sheet of paper, 10 simple guidelines. And we've asked innovators, if you have to go and your idea requires you to test something against somebody under 13 years of age, just email our legal team. Right? So there's just a few third rail guidelines that we don't want you to do, like obviously fulfill any obligation that you've said. If you collect people's information, you have to use this privacy policy, generic privacy policy, generic EULA, we delete your data. So we just follow all the standard guidelines. In fact, the privacy policy we use is the one from the FF. And so that's what people deploy. So very simple guidelines that our legal group came up with. When we started the conversation, legal said, we can't do this. But once we really got into it, so let's quantify the risk. And we got really deep into looking at what could actually go wrong and how bad those things are. It got down to this one sheet of paper. And we've actually had very few, where they've had to call out to legal to get help. Only a few of the 1,000 projects or so had to do that in the first year. Good question.
Very good question. I think I'm going to take one. Was there one over here on the side? All right, let's go to that one, that question in back.
My question is, how divergent is the innovation ideas that you've come up with, and what happens to the good innovations that don't match with Adobe's core principles or what they're trying to do?
So we've had, as I mentioned, probably not enough flying robot toys, because I really dig flying robot toys. But most of them have been stuff that didn't validate with end users, and the team themselves shut down their idea. So the vast majority of them, as you saw in the pyramid chart, never go to being pitched, which actually is a huge savings for management. So this isn't like some beauty pageant where every idea goes up. These ideas end up canceling themselves because they don't validate, because we're saying when you want to go pitch it, come with your validation data. So there's a whole deck they have to fill out, which is in the download, that has their validation data, and their validation data says people don't want this, they don't pitch it. And so it saves everybody a lot. We learned something that this won't work, and then we didn't expend resources after it.
Sorry, that doesn't really answer the question I was trying to.
Okay.
What if it's really good? What if the idea is really good innovation that does have the numbers to do it, but it's not something that Adobe wants to get into?
I haven't actually had that happen. If that did happen, we have a process for allowing employees to do outside projects that the company doesn't want to pursue and pursue them as their own thing, and that would be fine. Haven't really had that come up yet. I think it would be awesome if it did. We did have one project that actually Adobe decided that we didn't want to pursue it, but while the team was actually gathering their data, they had put out a website, not under Adobe's name, and they got an acquisition offer from another company for over $1 million. And so we had, they were like, should we negotiate? I'm like, no, that would be wrong. But it was really interesting because I was like, well, it would put Kickbox in the black for the whole year,
Terrific. With that said, we've come to a close. Mark, thank you for coming down and sharing your stories and for sharing Kickbox to the world. This is something that if someone comes to you and says, gosh, I really want to launch an innovation campaign, where should I start? This is the place to start. And it hopefully will inspire you to do something a little bit different and be able to leverage Mark's mind and his resources. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me. Great.
Absolutely.